Hi guys, my name is Howie Hunter and I'll be speaking today about economic inequality and social mobility in the United States, particularly after 1980. It's an important topic because a disproportionate share of economic gains in the last 30 or so years have flowed to a small percentage of Americans. Substantial changes have to be made to ensure that the rewards of economic growth go to a broader share of the population. To provide a historical context, the share of national income going toward the top 1% increased in the 1910s and 1920s, reaching a peak in 1929 with the booming stock market. Inequality then declines during the Great Depression, reaching a trough during the so-called Great Convergence from about 1950 to 1980, before then increasing dramatically. You might recognize this silver fox as Dr. John Rawls, a professor of philosophy at Harvard. He wrote A Theory of Justice, which laid out his ideas for how to achieve the fairest distribution of resources in a society. This is the most influential work in the field of distributive justice. He used the concept of original position, which is hypothetical and ahistorical. Essentially, all the members of a society would sit down together before its creation. Rawls wrote that they would be bound by a veil of ignorance. Each would have no idea of their social status, ethnicity, gender, or any other distinguishing individual characteristics. Thus, they would endeavor to create a society that was as fair as possible for each individual member. This chart demonstrates a different sort of veil of ignorance. One study found that participants didn't know how great inequality in the United States is. When prompted to create their ideal wealth distribution, participants left some room for inequality. However, their ideal was more equal than what they estimated America's wealth distribution to be, which was in turn more equal than the actual distribution. As evidenced by this chart, the 1% has seen tremendous gains in income since 1980. They have seen their average income grow by just under 300%. The top quintile, except for the top 1%, has fared pretty well, having about 60% growth. The bottom quintile, on the other hand, has barely seen any. This chart shows that income inequality is fractal. The higher up you go, the faster incomes have risen. Compared to the 1% as a whole, the top 0.1 and 0.01% have seen their income grow in leaps and bounds. These are largely executives or financiers who derive a large portion of their compensation from returns on capital. The Great Gatsby curve shows that social mobility and economic inequality may not match up exactly, but they correlate very closely. There are differences at the same level, however. For example, Canada is less equal than Finland, but has the same social mobility. Finland is about as unequal as Germany, but is much more mobile. The US, however, just about leads the developed world in inequality and lack of mobility. This chart shows elasticity of intergenerational income. Essentially, for each additional dollar a parent makes in the United States, their child will make 47 cents more. This compares to 50 cents in Great Britain, but only 15 cents in Denmark. Social mobility, however, isn't constant within America. One study found that the chance that a child raised in the bottom quintile would reach the top quintile as an adult was about 11% in San Francisco and Salt Lake City, but only 4% in Atlanta. Income mobility was higher in areas where poor families were more dispersed, where there were more two-parent households, better schools, and more civic engagement. Now that we have more context for the current situation, how did this come about? One explanation holds that part of the culpability lies with Ronald Reagan. President Reagan cut the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 28%. Meanwhile, he actually increased the lowest marginal tax rate from 11% to 15%. Growth in median income has utterly failed to keep up with productivity growth. One study found that about half of the productivity pay gap is because of inequality within the labor sector. When gains slow to the top, the median doesn't budge. The rest is due to decline in the share of national income that goes to labor. This is due to labor's reduced bargaining power due to unemployment, globalization, and decreased unionization. One of the great triumphs of feminism was that it allowed women to work outside of the house. Women now go to college more, work more, and earn more. However, this has helped to increase inequality. In a process known as a sort of mating, women who attend college are disproportionately likely to marry college-educated men. Whereas in the 1950s a lawyer might marry his secretary, he is today more likely to meet his spouse in law school. At the same time, people with lower education levels are more likely to marry each other. However, people from lower socioeconomic levels are increasingly less likely to marry, and are less likely to stay together when they do. A sort of mating based on education is estimated to have increased inequality by 25%. Increased mechanization and outsourcing have contributed to a hollowing out of middle-skilled, middle-income jobs. The manufacturing sector, for example, has increased output by increasing productivity through mechanization. That would be fine if the decline of manufacturing as a share of the economy was supplemented by an increase in high-paying jobs. However, most of the jobs created in recent years have been low-paying service jobs. The most obvious means to reduce economic inequality would be a more progressive taxation system. In this system, income in higher brackets is taxed at a greater rate than income in lower brackets, due to the theory of diminishing marginal utility. Essentially, your 100 millionth dollar will be less valuable than your 100,000th dollar, which is less valuable than your 100th dollar. The corollary to this is a floor on income. Known as the guaranteed minimum income, it was advocated for by Thomas Paine, Dr. King, and Richard Nixon. This would presumably be high enough to avoid destitution, but not so high that it would encourage significant amounts of people to quit their jobs. That said, a tighter labor market would increase wages. Whereas a guaranteed minimum income is provided regardless of employment status, the minimum wage is tied to a job. Minimum wage increases boost not only the income of those making minimum wage, but also people who previously made a bit more than minimum wage. Some believe that increasing the minimum wage would reduce employment, but empirical evidence is very mixed. Perhaps the most important thing we can do is to end educational inequality. 44% of public school funding comes from local government, most of which is derived from property taxes. More affluent people live in areas with more valuable property and thus higher tax revenue. However, reducing inequality is more than a matter of funding. Greater socioeconomic integration could benefit all students. Poor students will benefit from a greater concentration of middle-class parents who are better able to advocate for higher quality education. Their wealthier peers will be better able to work with people from different backgrounds. Through a combination of these policy changes, hopefully we can create an America where all are better able to succeed. Thank you.